As long as you live in survival mode, money will never stay. If you understood the law I am about to reveal, you would never look at money the same way again. Not because you would suddenly work less. Not because life would stop demanding discipline from you. Not because responsibility would disappear. But because you would finally stop breaking the invisible principle that keeps prosperity from remaining in the lives of so many people. You were taught a lie. You were taught that abundance is born from pressure. You were taught that constant hustle is normal. You were taught that anxiety is part of success. You were taught that if you slow down, you lose ground. You were taught that if you are not exhausted, you are not doing enough. You were taught that peace is for later, that rest must be earned through suffering. That tension is proof of seriousness. That living under pressure is the price of winning. But look around. The most exhausted people are rarely the most peaceful. The most overworked people are rarely the freest. And many people spend their entire lives trying to get ahead, trying to break through, trying to make more, trying to finally feel safe. While deep inside, they never actually leave fear. They never leave inner pressure. They never leave inner strain. They never leave the constant feeling that life could turn against them at any moment. That is not coincidence. That is consequence. Because money does not create security inside a person who is still living inwardly, as if life were a war. It may come. It may bring temporary relief. It may appear in seasons, in open doors, in promotions, in contracts, in opportunities, in unexpected breakthroughs. But it still does not stay. And the reason is deeper than most people think. Survival and prosperity do not grow from the same inner condition. Survival makes you rush. Prosperity requires direction. Survival makes you react. Prosperity requires construction. Survival makes you focus on what might run out. Prosperity requires the capacity to sustain what arrives. Survival compresses the mind. Prosperity needs inner space. Survival turns every delay into panic. Prosperity requires enough steadiness to keep building through process. So maybe your greatest financial struggle has never been only about how much money enters your life. Maybe the deeper problem is the inner environment that receives money when it arrives. Because a mind trapped in survival mode turns everything into tension. It turns time into pressure. It turns bills into prophecy. It turns delays into personal threats. It turns opportunities into emotional weight. It turns rest into guilt. It turns tomorrow into danger. And no one builds lasting abundance while living like that. Today you are going to understand why money leaves inner environments dominated by fear, urgency, and scarcity. You are going to understand why so many people work hard, improve for a while, gain some ground, feel a moment of relief, and still fall back into the same cycle. And you are going to see what must change in your consciousness so that prosperity stops being a visitor and starts becoming something that can remain. Because the truth is this: as long as you keep trying to build abundance from a mind trained only to survive, money may touch your hand, but peace will not touch your life. And when peace is absent, what comes in is often swallowed by the same inner disorder that was already there before it arrived. That is why this message matters. This is not just about income. It is about identity. It is about emotional atmosphere. It is about inner order. It is about whether you are living like a builder or merely reacting like someone trying not to sink. The mistake most people make is not only external. The mistake is in the place they are living from. That is what almost nobody sees. Because almost everyone has been conditioned to believe that financial struggle is always caused from the outside. Not enough money, too many bills, not enough opportunities, too much competition, the wrong economy, the wrong timing, the wrong environment, the wrong people, bad luck. And yes, outer conditions matter. There are hard seasons. There are unfair circumstances. There are real limitations. There are starting points that feel heavy and difficult. No one is denying that. But there is still a deeper layer that almost no one examines. Two people can face similar pressure and produce very different outcomes. Not because one lives in a magical world and the other does not, but because one acts from panic and the other acts from clarity. One lives trying not to drown, the other lives trying to build. One wakes up already emotionally indebted to the future. The other may still carry responsibility, but refuses to hand the throne of the mind over to fear. One makes decisions as if collapse is always around the corner. The other learns how to carry weight without turning every weight into internal chaos. And that difference, over time, becomes a different life. Because your inner state never stays private. It shapes the way you think, the way you choose, the way you negotiate, the way you respond, the way you wait, the way you interpret delay, the way you handle gain, the way you handle loss, the way you carry opportunity. Money does not only meet your effort, it meets your consciousness, it meets your beliefs, it meets your nervous system, it meets your self-image, it meets the emotional climate inside the person receiving it. And if what it finds is fear, haste, confusion, neediness, constant inner pressure, and a sense of danger, then even what comes in gets handled inside an unstable environment. That is why, for so many people, the issue is not only making money come, it is keeping it from being swallowed by inner disorder. Many people think survival mode only means being broke. But survival mode is deeper than that. You can be working. You can be functioning. You can be productive. You can be doing what needs to be done. You can be meeting responsibilities. You can be showing up every day. And still, inwardly, you can be living in survival mode. Survival mode is when the mind never really rests. It is when the body stops, but the inside of you keeps running. It is when peace feels suspicious, when rest feels irresponsible, when slowing down feels dangerous, when every small setback feels larger than it should, when every unexpected expense feels like a personal threat, when every delay starts to feel like the beginning of collapse. That is survival mode. It is when urgency becomes normal, when pressure becomes familiar, when fear becomes inner climate, when overthinking gets mistaken for wisdom, when anxiety starts to look like maturity, when you stop noticing how much tension is shaping everything you do. A person may call that realism. They may call it responsibility. They may call it adulthood. They may call it seriousness. They may even call it strength. But often, it is simply fear wearing the clothes of seriousness. And that fear begins to contaminate everything. The way you work, the way you spend, the way you save, the way you invest, the way you speak, the way you plan, the way you react to money, the way you respond to opportunity, the way you imagine the future. A person in survival mode rarely moves with the presence of someone building something stable. They move like someone trying to keep everything from collapsing. That is the difference. A builder thinks in foundations. A survivor thinks in emergencies. A builder sees process. A survivor sees threat. A builder creates structure. A survivor creates temporary relief. A builder thinks in strength. A survivor thinks in containment. And that inner compression costs more than most people realize, because it steals discernment. It steals creativity. It steals patience. It steals focus. It steals vision. It steals gratitude. It steals faith. It steals the ability to receive without immediately expecting loss. That is why survival mode is not only exhausting, it is sabotaging. This may be one of the most important truths you hear today. Money is not only a resource, it is also an amplifier. If it reaches a mind that has order, clarity, presence, structure, and steadiness, it tends to be used with more wisdom. If it reaches a mind ruled by survival, it can become one more source of instability. That explains so much. Some people get more money and become even more anxious. Some people improve a little and immediately become afraid of losing it. Some people experience a breakthrough but cannot even enjoy it because fear is already whispering, "This may not last. Do not relax. Do not trust this. You better hold on. Something will go wrong." So what should have been received with gratitude and maturity gets received instead with suspicion and emotional pressure. That person is not really receiving. They are only holding something temporarily while continuing to treat it as fragile, threatened, and unstable. That is why prosperity is not merely about arrival. It is about permanence. If money enters your life and finds an inner world that turns everything into urgency, then it will quickly be absorbed by the old pattern. The rush returns. The insecurity returns. The confusion returns. The feeling of lack returns. The emotional pressure returns. And then the person concludes, "I just need more money." But often, what they need first is more inner order. Because without inner order, more money may only feed an old pattern on a larger scale. That is one of the hardest truths for many people to accept. A person thinks the solution is always quantity. More income, more clients, more opportunities, more sales, more movement, more hustle. And yes, sometimes greater income is necessary. But there are also people who receive more without becoming more stable. Why? Because the vessel did not change. The mind did not change. The identity did not change. The fear did not change. The relationship with pressure did not change. The interpretation of life did not change. So the same disorder keeps reappearing, only now around bigger numbers. There is also a silent worship of struggle that keeps people trapped. Many people believe they are only doing enough when they are exhausted, that they are only being serious when they are overwhelmed, that they are only moving forward when they feel drained, that they are only worthy when their life feels heavy. That belief is dangerous because it turns exhaustion into proof. It turns pressure into identity. It turns overwork into virtue. It turns internal chaos into a badge of honor. And little by little, the person begins to trust tension more than clarity. If they feel calm, they think they are doing too little. If they feel organized, they think they are becoming soft. If they can breathe, they feel guilty. If they slow down long enough to discern wisely, they become afraid they are losing ground. This is deep conditioning, and it blocks prosperity in ways most people never notice. Because the person who believes they only progress while internally at war cannot recognize the power of stable construction. They do not understand what a clean mind can do. They do not understand how much better decisions become when they are not made from panic. They do not understand how much energy gets wasted when motion is driven by fear instead of direction. Struggle is not the same as progress. Pain is not the same as merit. Busyness is not the same as vision. Exhaustion is not the same as expansion. Some people are tired, not because they are growing, but because they are repeating the same fear, repeating the same disorder, repeating the same urgency, repeating the same scarcity-driven reactions, repeating the same inner war. And while that continues, their effort keeps being drained internally before it ever becomes peace externally. Fear is not passive. Fear gives instructions. A person afraid of lack does not only feel something. They begin to build their entire life around that feeling. They accept less than they should because they are afraid of losing everything. They say yes too fast because they do not trust that something better can come. They say no to the right thing because insecurity makes them hesitate. They spend impulsively to create temporary emotional relief. They cling too tightly when wisdom would have called for patience. They speak about their future as if lack were inevitable. They speak about themselves as if struggle were permanent identity. And when this continues for long enough, it stops feeling like a temporary state. It starts feeling like selfhood. That is the danger. Because everything you treat as identity gains authority inside you. If you see yourself as someone always behind, you think from behindness. If you see yourself as someone always at risk, you respond to life as if life were always trying to crush you. If you see yourself as someone money never stays with, you begin reinforcing that experience, even without noticing. Not because you are cursed, not because your future is fixed, but because the mind obeys what gets repeated with emotion. And almost no one stops to examine the daily declarations they are making. My life is always hard. Nothing stays with me. I can never relax. If one area improves, something else gets worse. I am always struggling. I am always catching up. I am always under pressure. I just have to survive. Feel the atmosphere inside those sentences. They do not only describe a life, they help continue it. That is why one of the deepest changes a person must go through if they want real prosperity is not only financial. It is linguistic, mental, spiritual, emotional, identitarian. At some point, every person must decide how they are going to live inside their own life. Will you keep reacting to fear? Or will you begin to build from consciousness? Reaction lives for the next problem. Creation lives by direction. Reaction lets the environment rule the mind. Creation develops an inner center that can respond without collapsing. Reaction interprets every delay as danger. Creation learns how to remain steady through process. Reaction compares, competes, panics, and fears losing ground. Creation works with focus, value, vision, discipline, and real growth. A person living in reaction mode does not actually build a path. They keep trying not to be swallowed. A person living in creation mode may still face pressure, limitations, responsibility, and difficult seasons. But there is one major difference. They refuse to let fear design the architecture of their consciousness. That changes everything. Because creativity, strategy, presence, and clarity rarely flourish in a mind dominated by survival. But they begin to flourish when the inner life comes back into order. Maybe what is missing in your life is not more hustle. Maybe it is more center. Maybe you do not need more emotional urgency. Maybe you need more mental clarity. Maybe you do not need to prove how hard life feels. Maybe you need to stop building from fear. One of the clearest signs that a person is still living in survival mode is this. They keep starting over. They start over emotionally. They start over financially. They start over mentally. They start over in discipline. They start over in routines. They start over in faith. They start over in vision. And after a while, starting over becomes normal. They tell themselves that life is just unstable, that every time they move forward, something always pulls them back, that nothing ever really settles, that progress never lasts. But many times, what keeps pulling them back is not only circumstance. It is the survival pattern still living inside them. Because survival mode rarely knows how to build steadily. It knows how to react quickly. It knows how to move under pressure. It knows how to function when everything feels urgent. It knows how to force action when fear becomes loud enough. But it does not naturally know how to sustain rhythm. And real prosperity is not built only by intensity. It is built by stability. That is why some people can have strong ideas, good intentions, great beginnings, real openings, even real talent, and still fail to turn them into lasting structure. Why? Because survival mode loves emergency energy. It loves the rush. It loves the adrenaline. It loves last-minute movement. It loves crisis-based motivation. But abundance does not grow through crisis-based living. Abundance grows through sustainable order. And that may be one of the hardest shifts for many people to make, because part of them has become emotionally attached to intensity. They are used to living with pressure in the blood. They are used to solving everything at the edge. They are used to moving only when fear becomes unbearable. So when life finally offers a quieter way to build, they do not always trust it. They think, this feels too slow. This feels too calm. This feels uncertain. This does not feel like progress, but that is often because their nervous system has been trained by survival, not by stability. And if you want prosperity that actually stays, you must learn to stop needing crisis in order to move. You must stop depending on emotional emergency to produce discipline. You must stop depending on fear to create action. Because as long as fear remains your main source of movement, you will keep building on unstable ground. And unstable ground cannot hold lasting abundance. This is something very few people talk about. Some people do not sabotage peace because they hate it. They sabotage peace because it feels unfamiliar. They have lived so long inside inner noise, pressure, rushing, anticipation, worry, and emotional compression that when calm begins to appear, it almost feels unnatural. Silence feels strange. Order feels unfamiliar. A slower rhythm feels suspicious. A stable season feels temporary. A good phase feels fragile. And because it feels unfamiliar, the mind unconsciously begins to prepare for disruption. The person cannot fully trust, cannot fully enjoy, cannot fully receive, cannot fully rest in what has arrived. Not because they do not want peace, but because peace feels foreign to the identity they have been living from. This matters deeply, because prosperity needs more than access. It needs the capacity to remain present without self-disturbance. It needs the ability to live without immediately creating internal drama around what has arrived. It needs a person who can remain grounded when life improves. But many people have lived so long in reaction mode that groundedness almost feels empty to them. They miss the old emotional noise. They miss the old rush. They miss the old tension. They miss the old fight. And when that happens, they may unconsciously recreate the very instability they claim to want freedom from. That is why leaving survival mode is not just about changing outcomes. It is about increasing your tolerance for peace, your tolerance for order, your tolerance for clarity, your tolerance for steady seasons, your tolerance for good things that do not immediately collapse. That is a real transformation. Urgency can also become addictive, not only practically, emotionally. There are people who do not know how to function unless something feels urgent. They need last-minute pressure to move. They need emotional intensity to focus. They need a financial scare to become disciplined again. They need life to feel like an emergency before they fully engage. And because of that, they keep living in cycles. Delay, ignore, avoid, panic, rush, fix temporarily, repeat. That cycle is exhausting, but it also becomes familiar. And familiarity is powerful. Even painful patterns can feel safer to the mind than unfamiliar order. So if a person has spent years living in urgency, they may unconsciously recreate it without realizing it. They procrastinate until pressure becomes unbearable. They avoid truth until reality corners them. They delay structure until disorder becomes painful enough. Then they move fast. They fix enough to breathe. They feel temporary relief. And then the cycle starts again. This is not only poor planning, it is often a survival-trained pattern. And it blocks prosperity because abundance requires rhythm, not emotional chaos. It requires consistency, not constant recovery. It requires a person who can move before things fall apart. A person who can act without waiting for fear to become unbearable. A person who can create structure before crisis. That is maturity. And that is why one of the great transitions in financial and personal growth is moving from urgency-based living to vision-based living. Urgency asks, what do I do so things do not collapse? Vision asks, what am I building so life becomes stronger? Those are not the same question, and they do not produce the same future. Scarcity is not only about having little. Scarcity is also about living inwardly squeezed. It is not being able to imagine expansion, not being able to celebrate without guilt, not being able to trust without anxiety, not being able to receive without immediately expecting loss. That kind of living drains the soul, because everything gets filtered through absence. Every blessing gets measured against what is still missing. Every step forward gets diminished by what has not yet happened. Every sign of provision gets overshadowed by fear of the next problem. And a person living like that never feels grounded. Even when something improves, the mind stays in lack. Even when provision appears, the inner life stays compressed. Even when opportunities open, the heart keeps expecting collapse. That is scarcity embodied. And as long as it remains alive, money may touch the hand, but it will rarely produce the kind of peace the person imagined it would bring. Because peace does not automatically appear when resources increase. Peace depends on the condition of the inner container receiving those resources. Scarcity also affects what a person can imagine. A person in scarcity usually thinks too small, not because they lack intelligence, but because their inner world has become compressed. They think in terms of survival. They think in terms of immediate relief. They think in terms of avoiding pain. They think in terms of this week, this bill, this pressure, this threat. And when the mind stays locked there for too long, it loses the habit of thinking in expansion. It stops asking, how do I build something strong? And starts asking only, how do I get through this? That is a painful way to live, because it keeps a person mentally close to the problem. They stop imagining increase. They stop imagining structure. They stop imagining peace. They stop imagining capacity. They stop imagining a different future, not because they are weak, but because survival has made their imagination defensive. And a defensive imagination cannot build the same life as a creative one. This is why vision matters so much. Vision breaks mental compression. It stretches the inner world again. It teaches the mind to stop staring only at the wall in front of it and remember that there is still a horizon. One of the first things survival mode destroys is vision. The person becomes so busy trying to hold everything together that they lose sight of what they are actually building. They know what they fear. They know what they want to avoid. They know what they are tired of. They know what they do not want anymore. But they do not know clearly what they are choosing to create. And that leaves them vulnerable, because the person without direction lives at the mercy of the next urgency, the next bill, the next delay, the next emotional swing, the next comparison, the next bad report. Vision is not fantasy. Vision is definition. It is knowing what kind of life you are building. It is knowing what kind of peace you want to sustain. It is knowing what kind of routine must be formed. It is knowing what kind of person you are becoming. It is knowing what patterns can no longer remain. Without vision, every problem feels larger than it really is. With vision, even real problems begin to take their place inside a larger structure. A person with vision does not stop facing challenges, but they do stop surrendering direction to every emotional storm. They know why they are reorganizing. They know what they are strengthening. They know what they are cutting away. They know what they are no longer available for. And that clarity starts to reorder life. Many people call something faith that is really just anxious desire. They want things to work. They pray. They hope. They long for relief. But inwardly, they are already preparing for failure. They pray for provision while feeding collapse in the imagination. They speak about abundance while still obeying fear. That is not faith. Faith is inner steadiness. It is the ability to keep moving without making anxiety your master. It is refusing to surrender your imagination to the worst-case scenario every time something takes longer than expected. It is refusing to turn delay into identity. It is refusing to treat process as proof of abandonment. Faith does not remove responsibility. It does not replace action. It does not deny reality. but it does refuse to let fear sit on the throne. Without faith, a person becomes hostage to circumstances. With faith, a person develops posture, and posture changes everything. It changes tone, it changes speech, it changes decision-making, it changes expectation, it changes energy. It changes what a person tolerates and what they no longer bow to. Maybe your financial life does not only need more effort, maybe it needs a mind that stops swinging between desire and terror, because a divided mind cannot sustain strength for long. There is a childish form of gratitude, and there is a mature one. The childish form only appears after everything is already solved. The mature form appears when a person refuses to hand the throne of the mind over to scarcity. Gratitude is not pretending there are no problems. It is not acting as though pressure does not exist. It is not denying responsibility. Gratitude is refusing mental slavery to lack. It is recognizing seed where you once saw only emptiness. It is recognizing progress where you once saw only delay. It is recognizing provision where you once spoke only of absence. Without gratitude, the mind becomes trained to interpret life through the whole. With gratitude, the mind begins to notice foundation, resource, help, movement, possibility. That matters because it changes the place you begin acting from. The person who only speaks about what is missing keeps strengthening the atmosphere of insufficiency. The person who learns to recognize what is present begins to break free from the hypnosis of lack. Gratitude does not solve everything instantly, but it changes the soil where decisions grow. And decisions planted in different soil produce different fruit. When people hear that prosperity requires inner peace, they sometimes misunderstand it. They think it means passivity, waiting, wishing, dreaming, doing nothing. But that is not what it means. Aligned action is still action. It is simply not action contaminated by panic. It is movement with direction, decision with clarity, work with presence, consistency without desperation. A person in alignment does not stop acting. They stop acting like someone being hunted. That changes the quality of everything. They choose better. They listen better. They manage better. They negotiate better. They prioritize better. They build better. Most people move a lot, but they move badly. Too much force, too little focus, too much urgency, too little presence, too much emotional noise, too little order. That is why some people work so much and still build so little of what actually matters. Aligned action comes from a cleaner mind. And a cleaner mind does not waste so much power trying only to survive. There is something else many people do not understand. Money can grow faster than identity. Opportunities can grow faster than identity. Responsibility can grow faster than identity. Access can grow faster than identity. And when that happens, inner conflict begins. A person may want a larger life, but still carry a smaller self-concept. They may pray for expansion, but still feel unworthy of stability. They may desire overflow, but still see themselves as someone who only survives. That contradiction matters, because if life hands someone more than their identity knows how to host, they often become unstable inside it. They begin to feel pressure where they should feel stewardship. They begin to feel fear where they should feel responsibility. They begin to feel panic where they should feel maturity. And because of that, they may mismanage, self-sabotage, withdraw, overspend, cling too tightly, or emotionally collapse. Why? Because their identity was never expanded enough to peacefully hold what life delivered. This is why the inner work matters. Because abundance is not only about what arrives from the outside, it is also about what you are able to peacefully contain on the inside. If your inner identity still believes you are only meant to scrape by, then anything greater may feel emotionally unsafe. And when something feels unsafe, the mind tends to reject it, disturb it, or shrink it down until it matches what feels familiar again. That is why your growth must not only be financial, it must be internal. You must become someone who can carry more without fear becoming the ruler. You must become someone who can handle increase without turning it into emotional instability. You must become someone who does not panic in the presence of expansion, because real prosperity does not only require access, it requires inner capacity. This truth may feel uncomfortable, but it is freeing. You do not sustain only what you desire. You sustain what your identity can host without destroying it. If inwardly you still see yourself as someone always behind, always at risk, always one step from falling apart, always waiting for rescue, always bracing for loss, then even when something improves, you will tend to interpret it through the same old structure. That is why some people sabotage growth, because growth requires a different identity. It requires someone who no longer feeds emotionally on scarcity, someone who no longer needs urgency to feel important, someone who no longer needs struggle to feel legitimate, someone who can remain present inside a good season without immediately expecting it to collapse. So the deeper question is not only, how do I make more money? The deeper question is, who must I become to sustain in peace what I keep asking for? That question changes everything, because it moves you from fantasy into formation. Prosperity without inner formation becomes instability. Prosperity with maturity becomes construction. There is also a difference between earning and sustaining. Many people spend years trying to learn how to make more. Fewer people learn how to remain steady once more begins to come. Earning asks, how do I open the door? Sustaining asks, how do I live well once the door is open? Earning may require skill. Sustaining requires character. Earning may require effort. Sustaining requires order. Earning may require boldness. Sustaining requires maturity. That is why some people have moments of increase without a life of stability. They know how to get in the room, but not how to remain there wisely. They know how to create momentum, but not how to hold a healthy pace. They know how to receive, but not how to manage. They know how to gain, but not how to keep from collapsing under the emotional weight of gain. Prosperity asks more from you than desire. It asks for structure. And if you want money to remain in your life in a healthy way, you must become the kind of person who knows how to steward, not just attract. Not all pressure is unhealthy. Life has weight. Responsibility has weight. Growth has weight. Calling has weight. Building has weight. The problem is not that life contains pressure. The problem is when pressure enters your mind and becomes your identity. There is a difference between carrying responsibility and becoming crushed by it. There is a difference between feeling weight and becoming defined by heaviness. A mature person learns to carry weight without letting weight become inner climate. That is a crucial difference, because some people let every responsibility become emotional panic. Every deadline becomes distress. Every obligation becomes internal chaos. Every problem becomes catastrophe. Every delay becomes collapse inside the imagination. That is survival thinking. It turns normal human weight into mental suffocation. But a person growing in order begins to carry things differently. They still take life seriously. They still honor responsibility. They still show up, but they stop allowing every burden to enter the soul as if it were final judgment. That change alone can transform a person's financial life, because money is handled better by someone who can carry weight without turning it into panic. Business is handled better by someone who can stay clear under demand. Opportunity is handled better by someone who does not collapse internally every time life asks for maturity. So part of leaving survival mode is not becoming weightless. It is learning how to carry weight without surrendering peace. That is strength. And that strength makes prosperity safer to hold. There are also people whose income increases, but whose insecurity does not decrease. Their circumstances change, but their inner climate does not. They receive more, but do not feel safer. They gain ground, but do not feel stable. They improve externally, but stay restless internally. That tells you something important. Security is not created only by increase. It is created when increase meets an ordered inner life. Without that, more money may only expose how disordered the inside still is. A person may have more options and still feel trapped. More income and still feel afraid. More opportunities and still feel as if everything could disappear tomorrow. Why? Because insecurity was never only about amount. It was about interpretation. It was about expectancy. It was about lens. It was about the story through which life was being viewed. A person trained by survival often expects instability even when conditions improve. They expect interruption. They expect disappointment. They expect loss. They expect things to go wrong. And those expectations shape the emotional experience of everything they receive. This is why two people can receive something similar and experience it very differently. One sees provision. The other sees temporary relief. One sees stewardship. The other sees fragility. One sees room to build. The other sees a short window before the next problem. That is not just personality. That is conditioning. And if you want abundance to feel different in your life, your inner interpretation must change with it. Because otherwise, your old fear will narrate every new blessing. Some people also fear success more than they realize, not consciously, but emotionally. Because success changes expectations. It changes responsibility. It changes visibility. It changes what must be sustained. And a person whose identity is still attached to survival may find increase more threatening than they expected. Why? Because increase means they can no longer hide in the old smallness. Increase means life is asking for expansion. Increase means old excuses begin to lose power. Increase means they must become someone new. And for some people, that feels dangerous. So they sabotage, they hesitate, they delay, they retreat, they complicate, they disturb what was finally beginning to grow. Not because they hate blessing, but because blessing feels heavier than their current identity knows how to carry. That is why self-worth matters. If deep inside you still believe you are more familiar with struggle than with stability, you may unconsciously move back toward what feels like home. If deep inside you still believe good things do not stay with you, you may keep bracing for their departure instead of learning how to steward them. If deep inside you still believe you are only someone who almost makes it, you may shrink every time life asks you to fully step into more. That is why abundance requires emotional maturity and inner worthiness. Not arrogance, not entitlement, but a healthy willingness to receive without apology what you have spent years praying for. A lot of people want abundance. Fewer people are ready for the emotional maturity abundance requires. Because abundance asks things of you. It asks you not to panic when more responsibility comes. It asks you not to self-sabotage when more becomes possible. It asks you not to shrink when life begins to open. It asks you not to waste what used to be your prayer. It asks you not to let fear contaminate what grace has delivered. That requires maturity. It requires steadiness. It requires restraint. It requires clarity. It requires self-government. It requires the ability to live without being ruled by every passing emotion. Some people think abundance is mostly about attraction, but sustaining abundance is about maturity. It is about becoming the kind of person who can hold blessing without turning it into anxiety. The kind of person who can handle access without becoming careless. The kind of person who can increase without losing center. The kind of person who can move into a larger life without dragging an old identity into every new room. That is why prosperity is not only a financial journey, it is a formation journey. And if you ignore that, you may keep praying for increase, while remaining internally unprepared to live well inside it. At some point, you also have to stop calling chaos normal. You have to stop saying, "This is just my life." You have to stop treating constant pressure as though it were unchangeable law. You have to stop normalizing what is quietly destroying your clarity, your peace, your faith, your decisions, and your ability to sustain prosperity. Because what you normalize, you stop confronting. And what you stop confronting, you keep living with. Some people are not stuck because change is impossible. They are stuck because disorder became familiar enough to stop looking dangerous. That is one of the most subtle traps in survival mode. The trap is not only pain. The trap is adaptation. You adapt to tension, adapt to fear, adapt to pressure, adapt to scattered thinking, adapt to living on edge, and eventually you stop calling it a problem. You just call it life. But not everything you got used to was meant to remain. Not everything you survived was meant to become your permanent emotional home. Not everything that became familiar became healthy. Awareness matters because awareness breaks adaptation. It helps you see again what you had stopped noticing. And when you see clearly, you can begin to choose differently. There is a moment that changes everything. It is the moment you stop living as if everything is always about to disappear. That does not mean denial. It does not mean fantasy. It does not mean irresponsibility. It means you stop giving fear total control over the atmosphere of your life. You stop waking up already bracing for loss. You stop expecting ruin every time something takes longer than you hoped. You stop treating peace like carelessness. You stop acting as if safety is always running away from you. And in that moment, something powerful begins. Your nervous system changes. Your speech changes. Your posture changes. Your decisions change. Your relationship with time changes. Your relationship with money changes. Because now you are no longer moving like someone haunted by lack. You are beginning to move like someone learning how to build. And builders live differently. They still work, still plan, still honor process, still take responsibility, still show up, but they do not surrender their entire inner world to fear. That is the transition. And that transition makes prosperity far more likely to stay. Before an account changes, a consciousness must mature. Before a life expands, a mind must leave compression behind. Before a season blossoms, an identity must accept that it was never created to live in a permanent state of threat. Maybe you have spent years asking God for more resources. But today, the deeper question may be this: are you becoming the kind of person who can sustain in peace what you keep asking for? Because prosperity is not only excess, it is structure, mental structure, emotional structure, spiritual structure, practical structure. Without structure, life may hand you something that your inner world still does not know how to hold. And remaining matters just as much as receiving. So hear this carefully. Money does not only flee empty hands. Very often, it flees inner environments filled with fear. Not because you have no value, not because you are condemned, not because you did not try hard enough, but because you were still trying to sustain abundance with a consciousness trained only to survive. Now you know. You know survival mode is not only an outer season, it is an inner condition. You know that condition distorts vision, contaminates decisions, and turns even open doors into emotional pressure. You know that more effort, without deeper change, can simply intensify exhaustion. You know that prosperity is not only about money arriving, but about peace, order, direction, maturity, and permanence. You know that struggle is not your identity. You know that fear cannot remain on the throne. You know your inner world must stop being a battlefield and start becoming a place of construction. And that shift can begin now. The moment you stop romanticizing exhaustion, the moment you stop calling urgency normal, the moment you stop confusing panic with responsibility, The moment you stop thinking that pressure is the only way to prove your worth. The moment you realize you were never meant to spend your life chasing safety as if it were always running away from you. The moment you understand that your life will not be transformed only by more money, but by a new consciousness able to receive, organize, sustain, and multiply what arrives. That is the turning point. You are not someone meant to live permanently at the edge. You are not someone condemned to constant tension. You are not someone meant to spend a lifetime simply trying not to sink. There is a higher way to live. Cleaner, steadier, wiser, stronger, more ordered, more peaceful, more aligned with real abundance. And it begins when you leave survival mode. It begins when you stop identifying with fear. It begins when you stop building from urgency. It begins when you stop treating chaos as your home. It begins when you choose to become the kind of person who can carry blessing without panic, carry weight without collapse, carry opportunity without self-sabotage, carry increase without inner disorder. That is the shift. That is the maturity. That is the hidden foundation of prosperity that stays. So if this message spoke to you, comment below. I leave survival mode and enter a consciousness of abundance. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell, and share this message with someone who needs to hear this truth. Because sometimes the great financial shift does not begin when more money arrives. It begins when the mind finally stops living as if it were always at war.